Hello, my name is Luke Wochensky, and you're listening to Adventures in the East, a Kinstellar podcast. Kinstellar is a leading law firm in Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And again, my name is Luke Wochensky. I am a partner at Kinstellar, and I am also the firm-wide head of our risk and investigations practice. This is the first podcast in our first season, and we hope you'll enjoy the content. It is our goal to shed some light on how the law works in the places where we operate, but also to shed some light on how the jurisdictions in which we work operate as well. So hopefully this podcast is interesting to attorneys and non-attorneys. I think the stories are interesting, and we will be using real-life examples to try to shed light on some of those issues as we go through this first season. We will be talking to some people from Kinstellar working in our different offices, and we have offices in 12 jurisdictions in Prague, Bratislava, Vienna, Zagreb, Sofia, Bucharest, Belgrade, Istanbul, Almaty, Astana, and Tashkent. And if you don't know where those places are, hopefully you will by the end of this first season. I will be joined by Matt Shannon. Matt is a good friend of mine, and we have worked together for many years. Matt and I are both Americans, but we have worked in this part of the world for 10 to 15 years. My background, my first legal education was actually from Herzen University in St. Petersburg, Russia. I am originally civil law qualified. I also am barred in New York State, a JD from the University at Buffalo School of Law as well. And to throw it in there, I have a master's from the Ohio State University in Slavic and East European Studies. So this part of the world has been a part of my life for a very long time. Today, we are going to talk about some general issues to sort of set the base. Matt and I had a conversation in Bratislava earlier this month in which we talked about what investigations are, give an example of a type of investigation, just to give some flavor as to what it is that we're going to be talking about in future episodes. Hopefully you'll find that interesting, but if not, I can guarantee you that future episodes certainly will be. We have some former CIA agents. We have some former DOJ or Department of Justice people. We have some former SFO, Serious Fraud Office from the UK people. We have attorneys from law firms. We have local investigators and attorneys. We'll be bringing people from all over to try to shed light on what it is that we do on a daily basis that we find to be fascinating. Hopefully you do as well. So right now we're going to go over to Bratislava, where Matt and I spoke earlier this month about investigations. Enjoy. We are recording today from Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia, but behind us here is the beautiful Bratislava Castle. Well,
yes.
So what's this podcast all about? Well, the Kinstellar Investigations podcast is our way of sharing the real stories and challenges that come with doing legal work, especially investigations, across Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia. We plan to talk about the kinds of issues our clients face on the ground, from whistleblower complaints to corruption risks to navigating local enforcement environments. Some episodes will dive into specific cases or trends. Others will feature interviews with colleagues, clients, or outside experts who've been through it all. The goal is to pull back the curtain a bit and offer insight into how investigations really work in this part of the world. So Matt, I wanted to start with you. How did you get involved in Central and Eastern Europe?
Well, it's quite simple, actually.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in college, we did a trip to Russia, and then I spent time in Ukraine myself, and just fell in love with the region. Is the short answer. As a rural kid from Maine.
Yeah. What do you like the most about working in this part of the world?
Well, I think that the best part by far is just the warmth of the people and also the unpredictability of the work. I mean, you never really know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Certainly stays exciting, doesn't it?
Exactly. Exactly. The further east you go, the more unpredictable it gets.
Definitely true.
As soon as you get to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, it's a completely different world in the Czech Republic.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the most interesting part, is that we have highly developed markets like Vienna and Prague, and then we also have really emerging and dynamic places like Uzbekistan. And It's just fascinating.
It's true. We can't think of it as one region. Sometimes we often want to think of Eastern Europe or Central Europe as one, but even within those places, like we're in Slovakia right now, there are still differences from the Czech Republic, from Austria, certainly.
I just drove here from Vienna, and it's completely different.
Yeah, fun fact, Bratislava is the only capital in the world that borders two different countries, Austria and Hungary.
Ah, okay.
Yep. So,
what about you? How did you end up in the region?
Well, I think the story is pretty similar, right? Term abroad in college, and I had always had an interest in the region. And I think it sort of gets you. And once you start doing things, then you remain here. I went to law school here. And as you know, developed a career in investigations and disputes. And I got to tell you, I wouldn't have it any other way. It's an exciting part of the world, and it's an exciting time to be practicing law.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
So, well,
how about we switch gears here and talk about investigations a little bit? Sure. The reason we're here. Let's start talking about investigations. But generally, maybe Luke, you can tell us what exactly do we mean when we say investigations?
Yeah. Investigations are an important part of really any major law firm. Traditionally, we have transactions and corporate law, and then you may have disputes. Investigations, though, is something that has grown and will likely continue to grow as a role for attorneys. So we're usually talking about either government-driven or internal corporate investigations. So fact-finding exercises launched when there's reason to believe something has gone wrong inside a company. Now that could be anything from a whistleblower complaint, right? When someone through some channel calls up and says that there's been some sort of bad behavior, to red flags in an audit, to a call from a regulator or even a journalist.
Yeah.
Now the goal isn't just to check boxes and say, has it happened or not, is to understand, of course, what happened, but also how serious it is and what the company needs to do next.
Right.
And that can be a wide array of responses. In our region, Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia, these investigations often involve complex layers, language barriers, data privacy issues, local enforcement sensitivities, and cultural dynamics. So it's not just about what happened, but it's about how do we navigate this effectively and responsibly.
Right. And generally, what type of investigations are there?
So there's really a wide range, right? But some of the most common for our part of the region include investigations of fraud. So someone may be siphoning funds, inflating invoices, or manipulating financial records, bribery and corruption investigations, often triggered by whistleblowers, with a very large multi-jurisdictional element. So the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which we'll refer to on here as the FCPA, UK Anti-Bribery Act, France's Sapin-2, those all bring in a complexity of issues that I'm sure we're going to talk about on these issues on this podcast as we move forward. Employee misconduct, this can include harassment, abuse of position, or ethical violations. Lately, sanctions and export control violations. So especially relevant now with the war, Russia invading Ukraine. Supply chain, third-party risk, data theft, cybersecurity. So there's a wide array of issues that will cause a company to initiate an investigation. Again, sometimes these are internal matters. Other times they're triggered by government inquiries or media pressure. But what ties them together is the need for a structured, credible response.
Right. I mean, how often does it happen that the company might not even know that there's a potential investigation coming?
I think that's generally every single time. It's unfortunate. I mean, I think most of the companies that are working in the region that are concerned enough to initiate an investigation, they obviously don't want the type of behavior that may or may not have happened. So generally what we see is that companies take it very seriously and want to find a solution that is of course best for the company, for the shareholders, but also one that's ethical.
Right. Okay. And who generally conducts an investigation, and why are lawyers involved?
Yeah. So it really depends on the type of investigation. It can be a mix of different people, legal counsel, compliance teams, external advisors, forensic accountants, digital experts, But lawyers, especially external lawyers, so lawyers working in a law firm, not working for the specific company,
Right.
they generally play a central role for a few key reasons. So number one, and likely the most important, privilege and confidentiality.
Sure.
So when you're conducting an investigation, you don't want to hand over all of that information to the authority, right? That's not something that the company is looking to do. So when lawyers lead the investigations, generally speaking, can be protected by legal privilege.
Yeah.
That's important. Number two, legal framing. Like I said before, it's not just about what happened, it's about what do we do next?
Yeah.
And in order to really understand what questions to ask, what information we need to know, you need to have an idea of the law, both local and perhaps some other jurisdiction,
Right.
to be able to determine the next actions and whatever may be happening. Third, I would say, is the regulatory strategy. So how would a law enforcement regulator, how would they react to the information that's happening based on past experience, based on what they're saying? So that could be a local authority. So here in Slovakia, the Slovak police. You could also have UK SFO. You could have the DOJ in the United States.
Right.
All of these terms we'll talk about in the future. But
Sure.
Really, any one of them, what we do in an investigation could impact something that they're doing, and that could have very detrimental consequences for the client.
Right.
So at Kinstellar, we often act as the central hub. We lead the investigation, but we also work closely with internal teams in the company, HR, compliance, forensic experts, also attorneys abroad who are working in generally US, UK, Europe, and we sort of pull that all together to try to have the best results possible.
Sure. And is there a sort of general pattern, or how do investigations typically go? I mean,
yeah, there's not generally there's never a one model, right?
Yeah.
But I think you can say that there are certain phases within an investigation.
Yeah.
So usually follows if we're talking about an internal investigation, it follows a pretty structured process. So first of all, you have a trigger.
Yeah.
Something has happened, and that knowledge is bubbled up to someone who wants to do something about it. So it could be a whistleblower.
Yeah.
Could be an audit finding. Could be a regulator knocking on the door. That's when the company has to decide, is this serious? What's the potential risk? And then things generally move quickly, but it's important that they don't move too quickly.
Right.
And our job as attorneys in sort of the next phase is to scope and plan. It's often difficult to plan because investigations go in directions you don't expect, but an attorney really needs to define what you're investigating, who needs to be involved,
Sure.
And how to protect legal privilege and confidentiality. In order to assess the legal risks, especially if there are cross-border elements. So for example, in the United States, there's something called the upjohn warning. You have to tell the employees that you're speaking with, that you're interviewing, that you are the company's attorney, not the employee's attorney.
Right.
Otherwise, the employee could be thinking that they're telling you information and that information is protected by attorney-client privilege. So we need to think in our role here about all of those things. And if you go too quickly, then that may cause problems down the road. Next, you have to preserve evidence. So locking down emails, files, devices, whatever might be relevant. And the goal here is to secure the facts before anything disappears.
Sure.
Intentionally or not.
Sure.
Once you've done that, you can dig into the documents and data if you're legally permitted to, which is a problem oftentimes in our jurisdictions. So emails, chat messages, reports, financial records, whatever it may be. You want to take a look through that. And AI is making that role a lot easier as it's being implemented. But you still, of course, need the attorneys to be able to guide that. Once you've got a foundation, you move into witness interviews. So choosing whom to interview and knowing what questions to ask, that's really important. And then comes the analysis. So you pull together everything you've learned, evaluate the facts, and determine whether there was misconduct and who was involved and what the implications are. So finally, you report your findings and recommend what needs to happen next. That could be disciplinary action, policy changes, or notifying regulators if something serious has happened that requires notification. So after that, there's often, further stages, remediation, training, fixing internal controls, and making sure the same problem doesn't happen again.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's very helpful. I was thinking maybe we could go through an example of an investigation that actually you and I worked on a number of years ago now in the former Soviet Union. Let's call it Project X.
That's right.
Maybe Luke, you can introduce it a bit, and we can chat about the issues.
Sure.
And I actually, it was quite a fascinating case to work on. So
It was difficult for a number of different reasons, but typical in the sense that it was an investigation that started and you think it's going one way and then it goes in 700 different other directions. So we do have to protect client confidentiality here, so we're going to stay away from a lot of the details. But I was on my way to the airport actually, and I got a call that there was an accident at a factory that was a couple hours away. And the accident happened actually a little bit earlier, and there were deaths actually and injuries that resulted from the accident. So when I was called, I thought originally that our scope would be understanding what happened in the accident
and how the accident happened.
Right? Because it's generally not something that would be expected in that particular industry.
Right.
Not, of course, unheard of, but not something that should be happening, obviously.
Right.
So when we started out, we thought that was sort of our role, was to be looking into how that happened, what were the problem areas, and then maybe how we best address it. In this particular case, as you remember, this was a company in one of the countries we were working in, and it had ties though to the European Union and ties to the U.S. as well.
Right.
And so here you have to understand that from the very beginning. And we were working from the very beginning with U.S. and EU counsel.
Right. Right. So once you understood what had happened, how did you start to determine what the scope of the project would be, and how did that evolve as things went?
Yeah. In this particular case, you remember, it's a lot of putting out fires, right? Yeah. And it is finding that balance, like I spoke about, of how do we put these fires out while we're making sure we're not going too quickly. And very early on, as we started down this process, what had happened is something that's very unusual in this particular place. So the accident happened and a criminal case was opened. As we started looking into it, the criminal case was closed. And this is a good example of why local experience is necessary. Right. Because in that jurisdiction, criminal cases don't get closed without someone being found guilty. Right. And it was very strange.
At least in 99% of cases.
99.99999%, right? And so something here had happened that was not right. And when we went out and had our first conversations about what was happening or speaking to experts, it was clear that something else was happening here.
Right.
So we reported that back to headquarters, and then the headquarters determined that it was time for them to come and join us and to take this a little bit more seriously, because something was happening. As we started, generally in these factories, it's not a usual day at work when someone comes in a suit and a tie and you're asking questions, right? And so as we had started to try to just get information off of servers and understand what the company had done to prepare for something like this. So were we able to access emails? Were we able to access cell phone records? Were we able to get to the information just to understand what was going on? At that point, we did get a whistleblower complaint. So someone who was a little bit concerned.
Right.
And they said that the criminal case was closed because a bribe was paid.
Right.
Now, at that point, that already raises it to another level.
Right.
And here we are, we have to do the full investigation and the full scope, like I had just spoken about.
Right. Just for clarity, on the internal side, this was all internal. Yeah, there was a parallel investigation going on. Right.
The law enforcement agencies were looking at it, but they closed the criminal part. Sizzle was still open. And so, yes, we were working with them to provide information and to provide the information they were asking for, but without giving more than we were comfortable giving. So a lot of things are going on here. We're gathering information ourselves. We are receiving requests from the police. We're providing that information in a way that is acceptable, where we can redact what needs to be redacted, where we can not, I don't want to say control the information, but we at least understand the information that's going out. And at the same time, yes, internally, we're looking all of a sudden at another issue, which is not only what happened, but was a bribe paid.
Right. So obviously there were immediate red flags in what appeared to be just an accident that clearly was not just an accident. What were some of the other red flags that you saw from the outset that made you think this might be a much more serious issue to deal with
Yeah.
than just an accident.
So some of the things I have done these for a long time, and not once have I seen a check given or a receipt that a bribe was paid, right? Check is or a receipt that a bribe was paid. So you're looking for other things, we found gaps in communication, right? You're not using emails to do certain things, payments where there's no immediate explanation as to how those payments went out.
Right.
The way that people are acting as we're speaking to them.
Right.
All of those things are a part of what you're trying to gather. Another thing, to think about is a lot of times recording those interviews is something that local companies will do.
Yeah.
However, when you record an interview, it's not work product in the US.
Okay.
So there's no added thought or anything coming from the attorney.
Sure.
So that recording then isn't subject to that work product, which we'll get into, sort of similar to attorney-client privilege. That means that information can be taken. So what we need to do is we need to document the interviews as we're doing them, and also in those documents write our analysis evaluation of that interview.
Right.
Which is important. So another little thing that, if you do that wrong at the beginning, then that could have very bad consequences down the road.
Exactly. Exactly. What were some of the other major legal or practical challenges that you faced throughout this investigation?
So I actually am going to throw this back at you, right? One of the things is sort of how the rights of employees in the places where we work, oftentimes, how they are protected.
Yeah.
So one of the first legal challenges was, what rights do we have to receive information?
Sure.
And the second is, what can we do with employees if we are finding any wrongdoing?
Yeah. All right. So Luke, you've got this investigation you're working on. I mean, how did it sort of come to an end, or how did you sort of end up figuring out that there was wrongdoing, and then how did you work with, that employee that?
So this was a fairly large one. So we had forensic accountants working. We had attorneys from other jurisdictions working on this. We were working on this. There were in-house people working on this. As we widened the scope of the investigation, we found a pattern of potential misconduct.
Yeah.
Misconduct by a certain employee.
Yeah.
So comes with as strange as it may seem, you have to pay the employee to leave, even though they may be guilty.
Severance.
Yeah. So what happened here is that we opened it up. We found a pattern that wasn't just this one terrible situation, but it was more of a pattern of misconduct. And then it goes back to our investigation understanding, were there adequate controls in the company? Had it been doing enough to try to prevent this behavior?
Right.
And that's really, really important for any company to be thinking about is, are you doing enough to prevent that type of behavior? Because things happen. People will behave poorly.
I mean, I do think we should point out that this person was probably trying to act in their own best personal interest. I mean, once the accident happened, they were, I would imagine, quite scared. In this jurisdiction, he had potential personal liability.
Very true. Yes. You could have jail time, right? And so, but regardless of the motives, right, it is misconduct.
Right.
And the misconduct may or may not be wider than you originally think.
Right.
So what happens after that is then we have to analyze. Once we have our conclusions, you have to analyze what it is next. Do you disclose the misconduct to whom, right? Oftentimes, if you decide to self-disclose, then you will have a lower penalty, or maybe not a penalty at all. If you disclose, you could say that you have taken adequate actions to mitigate that type of behavior in the future. So in this particular case, only in the details, but we did dismiss the employee, and we took further actions, and then we worked for a long time trying to implement procedures where that type of behavior would not be possible anymore. And so at the end of the day, I think it was a good exercise for the company to understand what it wasn't doing correctly, possibly,
Right.
and what it needed to do to fix those things, and maybe prevent situations like that, not only in that jurisdiction, but in the other ones in their operator which is all over the place.
Right.
So, I think at the end of the day, it was a good thing to hold the investigation, to find out those issues, and then to take care of them. And that's sort of what an investigation will be like. And as we move forward here with our podcast, what we're going to do is we're going to invite people in. We're going to talk about those types of situations and learn, because every investigation is different.
Right.
So I hope we've given a flavor of what an investigation is, of what that may be, and what we're going to talk about on the podcast.
We hope to see you in the next episode.
Thanks.